Thank you. I'm not sure I believe all that stuff. Actually, thank you. It's a great privilege to be back here at what I regard to be the greatest lecture hall in the United States of America, and I've been all over the place. And what makes it so is the audience. And I'm not trying to get on your good side because I'm going to need a lot of help this evening, but that's not what I'm doing. It's a fact. This is one of the most discerning, the most interested, the most knowledgeable audiences in America. And so I look forward to the question and answer period because we have some things that we can think about together. And we need to, because we have an awful lot of problems. I've described the current presidential campaign as unique in my experience in modern history because there are so many big issues. There are always important issues in presidential campaigns, of course, but think about what you face this time. Iraq, Iran, terrorism, which is something apart, the war against terrorism from Iraq and Iran. Middle-class malaise, healthcare problems, education problems, losing jobs, a skewed economy, which is fragmenting the United States in terms of distribution of wealth, and on, energy, immigration, et cetera. So today, what we're going to try to do is get to as many of those issues as we can, but I'm going to rely heavily on you in the question and answer period. So I'm going to take 4 or 5 of the issues and get through them as swiftly as I can, starting with Iraq. Apologize for the pace that I'm going to use because I want desperately to save as much time as possible for the Q&A. And while I'm thinking about it, one of the most delightful things about the audience, I said how perceptive, how intelligent you are, et cetera, et cetera. This actually happened. I had just been elected a private citizen in 1994, and I was asked to come back to the Y and speak again. I said, well, they don't want to speak to me. I'm no longer the governor. He said, oh, no, they'll be nice. They'll feel sorry for you. They'll come. And I said, no, I really would rather not. And then they talked me into it, and I said, okay, I will do it. But I didn't tell anybody in my family because I didn't want anybody there for fear that nobody would show up. And on the day that I was supposed to come here, it rained all day long. And I looked out the window of my law office and said, oh, boy, it's just what I needed, bad weather. Anyway, I got in a cab, came dutifully to the front door, and here were people streaming into the Y with umbrellas, you know, and all sorts of couples coming in. I said, my God, this is wonderful. Look at this. Now I was feeling better about myself. And this actually happened. I stopped in the front, got out, walked in. The little gentleman closed his umbrella in front of me in the lobby, shook it a little bit, and he says, boy, the weather is terrible. I said, it is. I said, but, you know, you came. It's wonderful. He says, who's talking here tonight? I mean, that's the truth. It's the truth. And I said, Mario Cuomo. I looked up and said, my picture was on the wall. I said, Mario Cuomo. He says, I heard him. He's pretty good. And maybe that's why I love the audience so much. Let's talk about Iraq, the surge. I was here only about 9-10 months ago, I guess, and things haven't changed a whole lot since then. Then the surge began, and since the surge, we've lost 600 more lives and spent $60 billion more. That's just from the surge. And so now we have 3,700 Americans who were killed in this war. More than 27,000 soldiers have been seriously wounded, and an unknown number of innocent people died in the war on Iraq. Innocent people. Some people put that number at about 800,000. All of that has happened in Iraq, in an extraordinary situation. No, a unique situation. When in our history did we have a war that was born so stupidly and so ignorantly, ignorant of all the important facts? 9/11, traumatizing. The next thing that happened is the President of the United States said, we're going to Afghanistan because that's where they are, that's where the Al-Qaeda is, that's where the Taliban is, and we're going to get them. And 100% of the people of this country stood up and said, yes, Mr. President, you're exactly right. And went to war, and then made a tremendous mistake shortly after that. Decided to leave Afghanistan to go to Iraq and start a war, a preemptory war. And unfortunately, and I will assume that it was done as an error, depending upon bad intelligence, everything that he believed as a predicate for the war was wrong. He believed that and told the world, starting with us, that Saddam Hussein was complicit with Al-Qaeda. That wasn't true. That Saddam Hussein was involved in 9/11. That was not true. That the Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction ready to be used, and that was not true. And that the war would cost us very little because we'd breeze through their forces with no difficulty at all. And that was not true. And that the war wouldn't cost us anything because it would be paid for by Iraqi oil, and that was not true. And that when we won the war, which we did in no time at all because they had no army to speak of, when we won the war, they would throw roses at the feet of the soldiers, and that was not true. Because when we won the war, they took those soldiers to be occupiers instead of liberators. And so he was wrong about everything, and that we'd have them back, and there would be no fuss, and we would have won a great victory and started Iraq on the road to democracy. And that was not true. And it is not true today, after all of these months. 3,700 Americans lost. What did Petraeus tell us? Well, General Petraeus was asked by Republican Senator John Warner, tell us, General, we're told that fighting here and losing American soldiers here, it makes us safe at home. Are we safer because of what you're doing? And do you know what the general's answer was? I don't know. You don't know? Then why are we here? It's almost incredible when you try analyzing all the facts here, how we got ourselves into this position. And what is the prospect now for getting out? Now, I don't see any real prospect of getting out. I don't think the president is going to change his mind. I don't think the president's mind on this subject is changeable. Now, I'm going to tell you a couple of things that we should spend some time on later on, if we have the time, because it's important. I don't believe that whatever the Democrats do, they're going to be able to make a difference with the strategy selected by the president. Why not? What if by some miracle they get 60% of the vote on a bill that says withdraw everybody, starting and doing it gradually, of course, but withdraw them all. We're not going to send you money. And you get 60 votes, which stops a filibuster, and you get enough votes even to override a veto. Let's say you get 100% of the votes. The Democrats and the Republicans all saying, we want to bring our soldiers home. What would happen? Here's what would happen, believe it or not. The president would say no anyway, and you would say, well, we overrode your veto, and so there's a bill. And he would say, that bill is unconstitutional because you have authorized me to have this war. I am the commander-in-chief. I've told you a dozen times that I say when the war ends. I run the war because I'm the commander-in-chief. You have no authority except to sign the checks I tell you to sign. And then you can argue amongst yourselves, and I'm sure we would, that, oh, no, you're wrong. You can't be right. You're not a monarch. You're just a president. And 100% of the people of the United States, through their representatives, have said you're wrong. And so, of course, and so you'd go to court, right? And what would happen in court? I don't know how many of you understand the principle of political question, but the principle of political question is an invention of the Supreme Court that says if there is a struggle between the two political branches, that's the president and the Congress, if they argue about something important, and certainly war power is the ultimately important issue, if they do, we can step aside and should step aside and let them handle it. What? What if it's a constitutional issue, which is the issue raised by the president? And we'll step aside. Well, but then who's going to tell us what the Constitution says? Nobody. And where does that leave you? In a stalemate. And what happens? That means we continue to die in Iraq and continue to spend money in Iraq. And you know how much money we have spent in Iraq so far? Now think about this when we get to the part of the speech where I say, this is what we need. This is what we need for people who are ill and don't have health care. This is what we need for people who are undereducated and losing their jobs because they don't have a skill level that's required. This is what we need to fix the infrastructure of this country so that the bridges don't fall. This is what we need for Katrina. This is what we need for Homeland Security. And they say there is no money. We can't afford it. Of course we have 47 million people without health care, and that's a disgrace. Of course it is. Of course there are people on Medicare who, you know, Medicare is not a luxury program, as you all know, I'm sure. Of course we have those problems. We simply cannot afford it. Really? Here's what the war has cost us. $10 billion a month. $10 billion a month. My God, $10 billion a month. It's about $600 billion now so far. What's $600 billion? Well, $750 billion is $750 billion. We're getting near $750 billion. How many zeros are there in a trillion? I mean, they go out to the men's room. That's how many zeros there are in a trillion. And wow, a trillion, I can't even conceive of it. Of course you can't. You know what the whole Second World War cost us? The whole Second World War, which I remember so well. I was a kid, but I remember it all, and a lot of you do. Millions of people fighting. Millions. Planes, tanks, all the money. Imagine the money, the ships. $3 trillion for the whole war. $3 trillion for the whole war. You're approaching $1 trillion for fighting in Iraq, a war that was supposed to end after a few weeks, with rose petals being thrown at the feet of our soldiers. Think of that. And they tell you we don't have enough money for health care. Well, Petraeus, despite his report, which was really discouraging, I thought, because he didn't really say anything. What did he say? I mean, think about what Petraeus said. He said, well, the incidence of violence is slowed down. Where? In the place where we put all the soldiers. Well, if you put all the soldiers there, of course it went down. What about in the place where you didn't put the soldiers? Ah, over there it's up. Oh. But in the place where we have the, oh, terrific, let me get this clear. So if we keep soldiers everywhere in Iraq, there'll be less violence everywhere. Yes. For how long? Well, it takes his comment, he didn't say this in the address, we'll be there for 10 years, really. And then you remember last week, I guess, the president just hinting at Korea. He says, well, just think about Korea when you think about these things. You know, sometimes you have to hang around for a while. We're still in Korea. We're still in Germany. And these people are thinking in terms of we're still going to be in Iraq 10 or 15 years from now. Just imagine the mess that this has become. Now, what about the president changing his mind? He's not going to change his mind. If he did, and if you did pass a bill, it wouldn't make a thing because mean a thing because you'd have a stalemate. The only thing that will change his mind is an epiphany. But that's a Christian word, you know. That's a real Christian word, and he is, I guess, a Christian. Maybe it could happen. Maybe I'll pray a little extra this weekend. But that's the only thing that would do it, is an epiphany. I don't see any other way. Well, who's that good for politically? Of course, we're in a political year. It's probably not good for the Republicans. Why? Because now it's clear, if I'm right, that there is no real chance of getting this done. It's clear that it's up to the president. And it's clear that all this money is being spent, and all these people are dying, and all this chaos is continuing because of the president who happens to be a Republican, and his Republican supporters who are in the Congress. So it's not good for the Republicans and in the Congress, and it's not good for President Bush politically. But what about the Democrats? I'm not sure it's particularly good for the Democrats either. Why? Because we won, the Democrats, in 2006 with the implicit promise that you elect us and we'll get them back, get the troops back. Now, we didn't say it that clearly, but we indicated it. That's why they voted for us, the people. They wanted the troops withdrawn, and they haven't been withdrawn. And you can say, well, yeah, but the reason for that is the Republicans. Well, look, I didn't vote for you so that you could give me an excuse for not getting anywhere. You've gotten nowhere in the Congress. Net result, the Congress now in the polls is at a popularity level under the president's. Wow, I didn't know that. Yeah, so it's not really good for the Democrats either. Well, then what do you suggest that the Democrats do? Well, one thing is clear, at the very least. I think the people who are winning right now politically or making progress right now are the independents. Why? Because people are disgusted with the Republicans because of the war. They're disappointed with the Democrats, whether they should be or they shouldn't. They're disappointed with the Democrats because we took over the Congress and haven't been able to get anything done and haven't been able to get our bills passed. It's not our fault, but people have a right to say, I'm not interested in your excuses, I'm interested in results. So they're disenchanted with the Democrats, they dislike the Republicans, and so where do you go? Well, I'm an independent, a pox on both their houses. There was a poll in Week magazine, July 27. It's a wonderful magazine, comes out once a week and summarizes things. It had a poll that said the following: 58% of the American people say, I'm not satisfied with the Democrats who are running for president or the Republicans. 58%. 58%. And people are talking about now there should be a real alternative. Now, they always look for alternatives, but I think that is more acute, it's sharper, and it's more real now than it has been. The Democrats, for sure, are not going to be able to win in 2008, going the way they're going now, getting nothing done, and just blaming the Republicans. They were able to win in 2006, the congressional, by blaming the Republicans. See, in that race, it was a kind of seesaw. If you could get the Republicans to go down, you would go up because you're at the other end of the seesaw. And so they pointed out that the Republicans have done this, and they're corrupt, and this problem, and the war, et cetera, and their end of the seesaw went down, and the Democrats went up. They didn't lift themselves. The weight of the failure by the Republicans descending allowed us to ascend. You're not going to win the presidency that way. What are you going to have to do? You're going to have to answer some of the big questions very specifically. You're going to have to be able to say, look, this man left us until January of 2009, January of 2009, before we can affect this with a new president. But when we get there, we will affect it. And you have to be very specific as to what you're going to do. You'll have to tell them how you're going to do the withdrawing. How's it going to work? Well, there are all kinds of plans for that, and I don't think it's difficult to describe some elements of them, because if you look at the book Out of Iraq, which I talked to the people who were here about 9 or 10 months ago, I said, this book has everything in it. And still, people haven't read the book. I haven't seen it discussed on television. I haven't heard it on the radio. I haven't read about it in the paper. But you get a look at this little paperback book, Out of Iraq. It has all the details you need for how to get out. Joe Biden has plans, a lot of different plans. You look at all the plans, they have certain ingredients. The withdrawal has to be in stages, of course. You can't bring them all out at once. That's silly. And so it's going to take time and have to be done in stages. Some of the coalition forces will be required to stay behind. For example, you have to preserve the assets we have in the green zone. You have to continue to train some of the Iraqi troops. And there are roles that will keep the troops basically out of harm's way for the most part. See, now they're standing between warring insurgents. You know, Shias are shooting at Sunnis, and Sunnis are shooting at Shias, except in one or two areas where they're making peace, and the Americans are standing between them. You're in the middle of a civil war. Well, the ones that stay behind won't be in that position. They'll not be in harm's way that directly, but some will have to stay behind for a while. Here's a big one, and all the plans say the same thing. You need a force to come in after the Americans. And so this argument that, well, when the Americans withdraw, there's this terrible vacuum, and people will be slaughtered, et cetera, et cetera. Incidentally, the people who project that if you take everybody out all at once, then there'll be chaos and madness and we'll be responsible. Who are those people who are saying that? The people who are saying that are the people who are saying, we're going to win this war in a walk. It's not going to cost us a lot of money. They're going to throw rose petals at our feet. We're going to use the oil money, et cetera. All those people who've been wrong forever on everything that we're dealing with are the same people who say that's what's going to happen. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But to assure, or try to assure that it doesn't, you should have a new force to replace the Americans. And it would be an international force made up to do policing, basically, for the Iraqis, and it would include some United Nations forces. And when you think about Korea, remember the United Nations and who was really doing the fighting in Korea. It would include United Nations forces, but be mostly made up of troops from Muslim countries, preferably Arab Muslims from Saudi Arabia, that's Sunni, Jordan, Yemen, Qatar, Kuwait, Syria, Oman, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates. Now, what makes you think they would do it? Because they've said they would do it. They can't do it now, the Muslim countries, because you're there. And that's the problem. Because the Muslims say, fed by the jihadists basically, but they say, well, see, it's those Americans, they're the problem, they're occupying our territory, et cetera, et cetera. You have been a provocation there, not a solution, but a provocation. Once we leave and make it clear that we're leaving, then they will be free to put their own troops in to help out the Iraqis, because they want peace in the Middle East themselves. A lot of these are rich oil places. They don't want to get involved in wars, because if you leave them alone, they'll all be Dubai. They'll all make a whole lot of money. And so they're eager to help out. And so you'd have that force. And there are a lot of other things that they have to do. They have to destroy landmines. They have to do closure. And also, you need a great infusion, a surge, if you will, of other things beside the military. You cannot create a quiet, peaceful, functioning democracy in Iraq with guns. You can't do it with the military. You can stop them from shooting at one another, maybe, but you can't create a smooth-running government until you have a society that can live together. And the society, in order to live together, needs to be able to make a living, needs to be able to have its private concerns, its domestic concerns dealt with. So you have to send a whole new surge of people in there, people who can show them how to create an economy, people who can show them how to govern, people who can show them what politics is really all about, because they've never had a democratic society. And incidentally, at the very best, don't expect a democratic society like ours. It's not going to be that kind of democracy. I mean, we're way ahead of anything they're going to be able to reach in any decent period of time. But you'd need that kind of surge, that kind of help, especially economic help. All right, how about Iran? Well, it's clear that Iran is a threat to the United States as well as to Israel. It's on its way to having nuclear weapons. That would further destabilize the Middle East. It has participated in strengthening insurgent forces in Iraq, and it's eager to fill the vacuum that's left by us. Everybody knows Iran are bad guys now. They weren't always bad guys. Remember, they were fighting Saddam Hussein. They weren't always bad guys, and Tom Friedman reminded us of that recently and said, hey, look, we were able to make deals with Iran. We were able to negotiate with them. So they've got Ahmadinejad, who's here now I think he's in the city, as a matter of fact. And he's a little wacky and provocative, but for the most part, you know, he thinks, and Condoleezza Rice thinks, that there is a chance to negotiate. Well, how do you feel about it, Mario? Well, it seems to me all you have to do is summon your common sense, and you would say, look, they're dangerous, these people, very dangerous. They're threatening Israel, they're threatening us. You give them an atom bomb. Well, General Abu Zaid said yesterday, former general, he's a retired general, said yesterday, look, yeah, bad if they have a nuclear bomb. But we're living with China in a nuclear bomb, Russia with a nuclear bomb, Pakistan with a nuclear bomb. We're living with all kinds of people with nuclear bombs. We can handle it if we have to. And if we can't, then you're going to have to get all those people and take all the bombs away from them. And incidentally, you created the damn thing. And remember that. Remember that when you wonder why people, are angry at you in some places. That we created it, and then we couldn't get it back into the bottle. And because we couldn't get it back into the bottle, now we have to be in charge of who keeps it and who doesn't. And we have to make sure that only the good guys keep it. And so far, it's working out fairly well. So far, there's enough civility and intelligence left in the world, even in the places we call evil places, where they say, we're not dumb enough to use a bomb because they have more bombs than we do, and it will wipe us all out. What we have to worry about, I guess, is a Muslim country filled with jihadists, all of whom believe they're going to go to 72 virgins or whatever it is. 72, I wonder where they got the number, but it doesn't appear to be terribly relevant. So what my common sense tells me is try to negotiate. Actually, turn the screws on negotiation. Be tougher on negotiation, because they're not strong economically. And if we turned enough heat on them, we might be able to bring them to their knees that way. We don't want to bring them to their knees. We want to get them into negotiating. What if you reach that terrible moment where you've tried everything and you really believe they're about to drop a bomb on Israel or do something terrible, and you have to use force? You have to use force, which means going to war. Then I would say this. And I'm going to say this very, very rapidly because I'm dying to get to the Q&A, and it's a tough legal proposition. I've hinted at it already. I would say this about going to war if you have to go to war. If people think, if our leaders think we have to go to war, and dropping a bomb, make no mistake about it. You hear about, well, can we go to Pakistan if Musharraf says Osama bin Laden is there, but he's not in a position to get him? Can we say, the heck with Musharraf, and we're going to go and drop a bomb on where he is and go across the Pakistani border? That's an act of war. Yeah, but you've done that. Didn't Clinton do that? Yeah, a lot of people have done it. All acts of war. Really? Yes, they are technically acts of war. And if you're going to try it in Iran, I would say this. Before you make the same mistake you made in Iraq, and here's the thing you haven't heard discussed. I'm certain you haven't heard it discussed. Before you make the same mistake you made with Iraq, make sure you don't do it with Iran. Because just look at what happened to you in Iraq. And what was the mistake? The mistake was, irony of ironies, trying to teach people democracy. And democracy begins with law and order. And the law begins with the Ten Commandments, which is the Constitution of the United States. And the Constitution of the United States, in one particular, maybe the most important part of the Constitution, where it talks about war. Under what circumstances do you go to war? Under what circumstances do you commit to killing as many of them as you can to save yourself and have your own people die in the process? When they got to that and they had to decide, the Founding Fathers, who would decide that issue? Who would tell us when to go to war? They went to Washington, and Washington told them, well, don't even waste any time on this. There are only two choices, the president or the Congress. He said, God forbid you would choose the president. The president's only one man, one person, one man. It's been ever since Washington, but one person. You can't give it to one person to decide. What if he's a madman? What if he's a megalomaniac? What if he's just stupid? No, I didn't say that. And he says, give it to the Congress. Now, they may be all maniacs and all stupid, but it's not likely that, there's as much chance that give it to the Congress. Why? Because they represent all the people. And say you must have a declaration of war. Declaration, incidentally, is different than a resolution. Declaration means you take it very, very formally. And you're announcing a big, big policy. And certainly this is a big policy, going to war. And so you deliberate, and the people from all over the United States of America contact their representatives and say, yes, do it for this reason, no, do it for this reason, and then you sit and decide whether to declare war. That's how you did the Second World War, the First World War, and all the wars back to the beginning, for the most part. You stopped it and didn't do it in Vietnam, which was an illegal war. It started without a declaration. And all the wars after that have been illegal until now. And people say, well, if that's true, Mario, then why doesn't that kind of eradicate the force of the law? No, 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 no. You cannot amend the Constitution by persistent evasion of it. What's happened is you had a lot of eager presidents and a lot of timid Congress people. And that's what happened in Iraq. They didn't want to have the obligation to declare the war. And so they let the president do it. And incidentally, those resolutions that they signed, you know, that everybody's arguing about now, Hillary, you did the resolution, etc. The resolution was not a declaration of war by the Congress, which is what the Founding Fathers said you should have. The resolution simply said, under certain circumstances, Mr. President, you may decide to go to war. In other words, the Founding Fathers said, don't let the president do it. The Congress must do it. The Congress said in that case, to the extent that they sent resolutions, okay, we don't want to do it, you may decide. Okay, so that wasn't a declaration of war. It was them surrendering the right to make the judgment and trying to transfer it to the president. But you can't do that. If the Founding Fathers wanted it to be transferable, they would have said the president or the Congress, you guys make up your mind. They didn't say that. They said we shouldn't have a single person do it. He might make a big mistake. And what the hell was Iraq but the world's biggest mistake? And that you don't want to see that happen again. That's Iran. If you're going to have a war, make sure you do it right. God forbid we have to do it at all. Also, we have to do something. Then you have to talk about how. Now, this is what the Democrats have to do. They have to do all these specifics. I want to talk more about that legal issue later on if you give me the chance, if we don't run out of time. I keep looking at my watch and I don't know when the time's supposed to be up, so somebody there should tell me. But let's talk about the war against terrorism. What happened to the war against terrorism? Anybody know? Where was it? It was in Afghanistan, right? Here's a great story, and don't take my word for it. Get the book by, it'll come to me in a minute. Tommy Franks is in charge of the forces in Afghanistan. And he hears, in the middle of his struggle, which was not going great in Afghanistan after the Taliban and al-Qaeda, but he knows Osama is there, and he knows the al-Qaeda is there, and he knows that the fight there is the right fight to make. And he's told that the president's going to Iraq, or wants to go to Iraq. He said, oh, no, that's all wrong. That's all. He shouldn't go to Iraq. It's too early. We have to finish here. We have to get the al-Qaeda here. We've got them here. They're not in Iraq. They're here. Don't take troops from me and send them there. President didn't listen. Cheney didn't listen. Rumsfeld didn't listen. They didn't want to listen. And later on, Tommy Franks appeared at the convention, said all kinds of nice things about the president. But the truth was he had said that this was a terrible mistake. What's happened since then? Now, we're not doing well in Afghanistan. So you have to go back to Afghanistan. And that means you're going to need some troops. So you're going to take troops home with the withdrawal that we talked about from Iraq, but then some of them you're going to have to send to Afghanistan. Because the Taliban and al-Qaeda have not been defeated. They're still strong. We have to go and finish that job. Now, beyond Afghanistan, you have fanatic jihadists scattered throughout the Middle East and far beyond. As a matter of fact, they're all over the world, it seems. And they're sprinkled among millions of human beings, and they're hidden by those human beings. So they don't have uniforms. They don't come from countries. They're not easily identifiable. Nobody knows that better than we do. And you have to get them. How do you get them? Well, where you do find them in clusters or camps, etc., you have to get those camps. You have to destroy the camps. And if they happen to be in them, you'll probably have to destroy them too. But you have to go out and use your military force to get them. But it's going to take better intelligence than we have now, and we're working on it, to find out where they are. And it needs more collaboration with our allies and negotiation with our enemies where that's appropriate. At the same time, we have to work to win the active support. Remember, let's say there are 1 billion Muslims in the world, right? Muslims are people who believe in Islam, and there are only 3 theistic religions, and Judaism, number 1, Christianity, second, Islam. Say there's 1 billion who believe in Islam and Muhammad and all of that. Jihadists are only the people who call themselves Muslims, and maybe are, but who have decided on killing other people in the name of their religion. That's a small percentage of all the Muslims. But who's paying a price for it? The Muslims everywhere. Because you remember what happened after 9/11. If you saw a guy in a taxi cab driver with a turban on, even if he was a Sikh, which a lot of them were, you know, you figured, oh yeah, and some people got angry and some people even hit some of these people. But we have to work with those 90% to get them involved in helping us deal with the smaller percentage of jihadists, because those jihadists are stigmatizing them. Another thing that has to be done, and here Bush was right, we must join our allies in fighting the economic oppression that makes millions of Muslims vulnerable to seduction by terrorists. What does that mean? That means if you've got a place like the place I was born in, South Jamaica, Queens, where, well, you know what South Jamaica is. I mean, South Jamaica was so tough that you identified yourself by your police precinct. You really did. I just finished telling somebody this outside. They'd come up and ask you, where are you from? 113th precinct. And the guy said, oh. 113th precinct. Oh, okay. All right. Great. Sure. See you. What's your name? And you grumble and walk off. That places where there's a lot of poverty, places where there's desperation in the Middle East, and parts of the Middle East are poorer than any place but parts of southern Africa, where there is that kind of desperation and people can't make a living, etc. I'm not saying that poor people are all killers and James Cagney and white heat and all of that. Forget about that. That's not true. But it is true that it's easier to seduce those people into doing bad things, the way some of these people are being seduced into it, into jihadism. And so we have to help them with programs like the ones that President Bush thought up, Millennium Challenge and the Arab Partnership. And they were programs that our Secretary of State at the time, Colin Powell, loved. They were liberal, they were progressive, and they were useful, and they didn't fund them. And ironically, the president put those in the defense strategy of 2002, which is the place where he first mentioned preemptive war. You must file the defense strategy every year or a couple of years and make it available to the public. And when he started talking about preemptive war, and that same thing, he said you have to fight the economic malaise of these people. In short, we need to try to create a new vision. This is the war on terrorism for the region that promotes peaceful coexistence, encouraged by a well-functioning economy that allows people to earn a good life for themselves and their families. And this will take a combination of military force, intelligence, police power, government programs, economic development support, investments, education, trade, strategic communications, not precipitous, preemptory, poorly prepared, rash wars like the attack on Iraq. And that's what the Democrats have to come to. At the same time, we can't let our foreign policy problems eclipse entirely our many challenges at home. And what are the challenges at home? You know, how much time do we have? He doesn't know either. See, I don't feel so bad. Make it up. Just give me a number. How much time do we have? Okay, all right, great. You'll be here. Okay, great. At the same time, we can't, okay. The economy has fragmented us into a three-tiered democracy with a small but growing number of extravagantly wealthy people, a large majority of workers struggling not to slide back down the economic ladder, and as many as 36 million Americans, including 13 million children, mired in poverty. That's what we are. Now look, we're a democracy. Okay, in a democracy, there are going to be rich people, poor people, and people in the middle. Always will be. But it doesn't have to be as bad as it's gotten. It doesn't have to be as bad as it's gotten. There are maybe, let's see, numbers. Maybe 3% of the people, maybe 3% make $275,000 or more. Or maybe even $300,000 or more. 2 or 3% of the people. Top 1% average about $1 million, $1.5 million apiece. Okay? Very tiny group. We have more billionaires and millionaires than ever, but we have that very tiny group up there. And then you have 36 million people at the bottom. What do you mean at the bottom? They're poor. 13 million of them are children. 13 million poor children in the United States of America? 13 million, yeah. I've said this over and over and over again, and the picture is so vivid in my mind that I keep using it. I went back to South Jamaica, kept going back with my kids and then my grandkids to show them what it was like, you know, down there. And saw kids, you know, just 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old in the neighborhood, you know, just walking around on the streets. And it occurred to me, you know, they're surrounded by pimps, prostitutes, disorientation of all kinds, guns. I mean, guns are everywhere. No police. And some of those kids grew up familiar with the sound of gunfire before they ever heard an orchestra play. They didn't know what an orchestra was. 13 million kids who are poor in this country, the richest country in world history. $10 billion a month on Iraq. $600 billion in the war. And you have 37 million, 36 million, 13 million of them children poor. How the hell do you explain that to yourself? How do you live with that? How can it be? So we have to do more. You have to do middle class. The middle class is sinking. Why? Now, who are the middle class? I've given you this definition before. You can go all the way back to Aristotle, incidentally. He wrote about the middle class 2,000 years ago. And he said the group in between, the very wealthy and powerful and the desperate at the bottom, the middle, seeking to make a better life for themselves, to gain more property and more security and more compensation, and they do it by whatever means they can that are decent and legal. If you're in Manhattan, what is the middle class? I don't know. You could make $150,000 a year in Manhattan, have 3 children and no spouse, and starve to death. I mean, so middle class. Here's my definition of the middle class. Middle class are those people who work for a living because they have to, not because some psychiatrist told them it's a good way to fill the grim interval between birth and eternity. You know, you work because you have to. And you work because you're not economically secure, so secure that you don't have to work, okay? That's the middle class. And there are all kinds of people in the middle class, and the number of compensation, the amount of compensation will vary with where you're living and when you're living there. That group in this country now, it's 140 million workers. It is the vast majority of the workers. It's maybe 120 of the 140 million workers in the country. And the price of everything they need most. What do they need most? They need education for skills. They need healthcare, 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 healthcare. They need security at the end of the line. They need money for transportation. The cost of everything they need most is going up faster than their wages. Their wages are basically stagnant, which is an unusual thing. So they're sliding down instead of going up. This wasn't always true, but that's the middle class. What do you need to help them? Well, they're losing jobs for all kinds of reasons, globalization, et cetera. Skills has a lot to do with it. Only 1 out of 4 of your workers are high skilled. What? 1 out of 4 of your workers are high skilled. Only 1 out of 4, 25%. Wow. What's high skilled? About 4 years after high school education. I'll take in a good community college and a particular skills 2 years. But education beyond high school, probably 4, maybe 2. And we have only 1 out of 4 of those in this country. Well, that's a problem, isn't it? Because the level of skills needed is growing up. Yeah, that's right. A big problem. They need college education. 150 years ago or so, 120 years ago, we started with public schools, and the theory was, we'll give schools to everybody because we need them, because we need a certain level of education in our workers, because we're in an economic society and the Industrial Revolution and we have to compete, etc. And then we stopped at age 16 or 17. It was a great idea. But as the level of skills required kept crawling upward, we didn't take the public education system and lift it up with it. Why? Because we made the mistake of saying it should be local and not federal. And so you left it to the individual states, and some were too poor, and some didn't give a darn, et cetera, et cetera. But education, like health care, should be a federal concern. Yes, the state is involved in it too, but it's so important to the whole country that it should be a national concern as well. So you need more education, you need more health care, you need more help for the middle class. All that stuff costs money. You have a deficit already. So that leads to the really big question. And this is the question nobody wants to answer. Okay, Mario, you want to do all those good things? And we agree. We agree it's a problem. You got 47, 48 million people without health care. Yeah, you're right about the wages of the middle class. They're stagnant. All of that stuff you're right about. But where do you get the money? When's the last time you heard a politician go to the microphone and say, here's where you get the money? Now, let me tell you, I'm going to have to raise taxes on this guy. I'm going to take something away from this guy. So they don't want to do it. Why? Because it's usually bad news. But if you don't do it, then you're not being responsible. And for the Democrats to win, they're going to have to do it. And for the Democrats to be entitled to win, we should require that they do it. And if they tell us they have a health care plan, we should say, all right, now show me how you're going to do it. Now, here, very quickly, let's go back to the year 2000. It's not so long ago. In the year 2000, we were doing great. We had a $5.4 trillion potential surplus. No deficit. 2000, no deficit. End of the Clinton years, no deficit. $5.4 trillion surplus. Wow. 2000. Now, if we had that money now, I would tell you where we were going to get the money very easily, because we have a $5.4 trillion surplus. It's easy. Just spend $1 or $2 trillion, and keep the $3.4 trillion on the side for holidays. We could do that. But we don't have that money. We have blown it. The huge surplus has been given away by what many of us agree had been reckless spending and promiscuous tax cuts, not for the middle class who badly need them, but especially for those people who didn't need the money while the government and the nation desperately did. And so we've given that money away. So where are we going to look? Here's where we look. A large part of our spending, a very big part, is in Social Security and Medicare. Social Security and Medicare. I qualify for both. I'm familiar with these two programs, and their main purpose was to see to it that people like me are not left utterly destitute in their old age. And that objective can be met while also reducing benefits in both these programs that go to people rich enough not to be injured by the reductions. It was a great idea. We don't want anybody to starve to death. They're too old to work. We want them to have Social Security. We want them to have Medicare. Wonderful idea. But why did they say that even rich people should get it? Because they didn't want to have an argument at the time, with who's rich, who's not rich. They said, what the hell, we have a lot of money. Everybody gets it. Well, there are people like Gates, people like Buffett, who come before the Congress of the United States when the death tax was being discussed. 600 of them came, 600. Billionaires and millionaires, and said through Mr. Gates Sr., who was a wonderful man. I know him. He invited me to go to Washington to dedicate a law school for him. And so I met Bill and his wife and the kids, and Bill Sr., this wonderful man who was the spokesman in Congress, and said, this idea that we, billionaires and millionaires, this is all our money and we should leave it all to our kids and be free and no taxes. That's a sin. He said, that's a joke. We owe this country. We're millionaires and billionaires only because this country is so strong and so good. Only because this country's army defended us and won wars for us. Only because this country's economy allowed us to become rich. We didn't do it by ourselves. And the idea that we should be getting Medicare and Social Security when people are doing without these things, where people are poor, it just doesn't make any sense. So we could effectively cut considerable amount of money. I can't give you an exact number. Nobody could right now. From make it a means program, at least to the extent that people who absolutely don't need it, shouldn't get it, so that the people who do need it can get it. I think that makes a lot of sense. Alternatively, We can apply the Social Security and Medicare taxes to all income, including non-salary income. See, now there's another way to do it. You have these billionaires and millionaires. If you're going to, when you tax them for the Medicare, the FICA, remember FICA? Do you know what FICA is? Come on, no you don't. No, you don't. You look at the check, you see FICA. People look at the check basically to see how much like the last one this one is. Is it the same number, or did they take something out of it? But FICA is those taxes that we pay for Medicare and Social Security, you could get rid of the whole Social Security problem by changing the level of tax. Right now, you stop at about $90,000. After $90,000, the guy gets to be a trillionaire, you don't tax the rest of it. What, are you kidding? That's when you should start taxing it. When it gets to $90,000, keep now double the tax, everything over, certain numbers. So there's a lot of money there. At the same time, we should return to pay-as-you-go. Pay-as-you-go is like what you do at home. I'll give you money for a new car. We'll save it up, or a new roof, but we got to save money over here. In other words, you have to produce the money you're going to spend. You have to get it from somewhere else. Now, Newt Gingrich was very helpful, frankly, to Clinton when Clinton did that, and they saved an awful lot of money in the budget by making it pay as you go. At the same time, we should, and the federal budget. Alan Greenspan made this point. He was very disappointed with Bush because Bush wasn't tough enough on the budget. There are huge portions of pork to feed Congress's political appetite. We all know that. That's what the earmarks are about. That's what members' items are about on the state level. And that's what corporate welfare, to use John McCain's term, is about. A lot of this money is given away. It really is. Add to that $15 billion a year that are lost because capital gains taxes go unreported to the IRS. That's Chuck Schumer. Consider this, too. Most of the insolvency problem of Social Security could be corrected just by removing, I've said this to you, the $90,000 limit. There's another huge treasure in the form of hundreds of billions of dollars in tax cuts that are given to the top 1%. Now, is it smart or good for America that so much of our wealth should go to people who don't need it? Now, I'm not against being wealthy. I mean, I'm all for it. I'm struggling to be wealthy. I mean, my mother, may she rest in peace, what a wonderful woman she was. And she loved Lee Iacocca. She just loved Lee Iacocca. She didn't know, she had heard there was a joke about me and Lee Iacocca and President Reagan. She had heard the joke, and she asked me about it. Who is Lee Iacocca? And I told her who he was. He's got a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars. Really? Yeah. Why, his family was rich? No. They came over the way you came over, Mama. Really? No kidding. Yeah. Yeah, but we're not rich there like them. Oh, no, Ma, he's a super millionaire. He says, God bless him. God. How did he get, in Italian, how did he get so rich? I said, Fai automobile. He makes automobiles. She says, what's the matter? You couldn't learn how to make an automobile? So, they did not come, these wonderful immigrants. They didn't come here to make their children solid middle class, or to avoid poverty. Go for it. The more successful you are, the better. That's very much an American thing, and I'm very much for it. And I'm not for confiscating all the wealth of the wealthy people. Not at all. And I'm going to give you now a good example of how this could work. There is the shibboleth now, and it's a palpable shibboleth, and easy to prove that it is nonsense and a political contrivance. It's maybe the phoniest of all. Some politicians argue that the tax cuts to the rich are needed to keep the economy strong, and that reversing those tax cuts now would weaken the economy. That, if you want to read the latest version, Dick Cheney in the Wall Street Journal, I think today, said that. And the theory is every tax cut is good and every tax increase is bad. That's ridiculous. And it's provably so. Certainly there are situations when tax cuts would be stimulative. And so you cut taxes, and we did in the income tax at the state level. And other situations where tax increases would be retardants to economic growth. So if you increase the tax, it slows down the growth. I did the one and avoided the other aggressively myself as governor. Right now, we can use the examples by President Reagan, first George Bush, and Bill Clinton to our advantage. Now, here's what I'm talking about. They are saying, I am saying, let's take the cuts that we gave to those rich people, 1%, they average $1.5 million, they don't need it, let's take it back because we need it for all the things we've mentioned, not to mention the war. Leaving the war aside, we need it for all the things that the country needs, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. Here's what happened with Ronald Reagan. And nobody seems to know this story but me. Why? Because I was a governor, and it affected me a great deal. I was a governor starting in 82. I won 83. Reagan won in 80. He started in 81. And he started with huge tax cuts, and he's still known for his tax. Incidentally, I loved him. I loved Ronald Reagan, despite the fact he thought I was Lee Iacocca when he first met me. And that was a joke. No, that was the joke. Moynihan tried to introduce me to him. Nobody knew who I was. They didn't know how to spell my name. I won by accident over Koch, and Ed kept mispronouncing my name, so that everybody had me. And so the president certainly didn't know me, Reagan, and he went to introduce me to him, and Reagan cocked his head and said, because he was trying to say this, I want to introduce you to, before he could get my name out of his mouth, President Reagan blew him away and said, oh, you don't have to introduce us. I know Lee Iacocca well. That's the guy's on it too. And I've told the story over and over. For one terrible moment, it came seething from the furthest recesses of my psyche, you know, the inevitable response to something like that if you're a kid from Queens. But I got to the tip of my tongue and I bit it and spat it out. I was going to say, I know, Mr. President, to some people we all look alike. But I didn't say it. And I told that joke with him listening. I was at the mic just as I am now, and Matilda was sitting next to him at the gridiron dinner, and you know, the Democrats make fun of the Republicans make fun, and then the president gets up and makes fun of everybody. It's a wonderful affair. And the president turned to Matilda and says, never happened. And I looked down and I said, yes, it did, Mr. President. And the president said, maybe it did. And it did. So he was a lovely man, a lovely, lovely man. And he did cut the taxes a lot. Big tax cut, and he's known for that, okay? His program was, remember, here's what I'm going to do to solve the malaise that Jimmy Carter left behind. I'm going to give us a real shot. I'm going to cut the taxes. That will excite the economy terrifically. I'm also going to give more money to the defense budget. I'm going to build a pile of missiles so high that the Russians are going to see it, the Ruskies, he called them, and they're going to, Soviet Union, the Ruskies are going to surrender. And so I'm going to spend a lot of money on the military, and I'm going to cut your taxes, and we're really going to go for broke. And then an accountant put his hand up and says, well, if you're going to cut the taxes a lot, that's less money coming in, yeah. And you're going to spend more on the military budget, more money going out, yeah. He says, how do you balance the budget? You have to balance the budget, right? You know, we'll balance the budget in 3 years. Why? The magic of supply side. What is the magic of supply side? The magic of supply side is when you cut the taxes of the investors, they get so delighted at the new amounts of money they can make by investing that they invest more and more money. And as they invest more and more money, the wheels of the economy start spinning faster and faster and faster. And they produce so much that in 3 years you get back all the money you gave to them, plus more. Really? Why don't you cut the taxes to zero and then everybody would be wealthy? Why didn't you do that? Oh, no, well, no, there were limits. Oh, I see. So that's the magic of supply side. Yeah. Reagan was off by $2 trillion. He created the biggest deficit in debt in American history until recently when Bush broke the record for deficit and debt. Now, this is the truth. How did he cure that? He raised taxes 7 times. And the last times on the top, the people at the top, about $99 billion worth. Ronald Reagan raised taxes 7 times, including the Social Security tax for workers and employers alike. And $99 billion, because the deficit was so big he had to manage it. And he was followed by George Bush, who incidentally, George Bush I, had run against Reagan in the primaries, and when Reagan introduced the magic of supply side idea, he said, Bush did, that's voodoo economics. He was right, But he married the witch doctor, and so he got caught up in the whole thing. And then he started his presidency, read my lips, I will not raise the taxes. But the deficit was so big, he had to raise the taxes. On who? On the people at the top. How much? About $90 billion. And he took the rate, which Reagan had reduced, and pushed it up higher, over 30%. Wow, they raised both of them, son of a gun. Then Clinton came, and in his first year, he raised taxes on who? At people at the top. How much? About $100 billion. Wow. And what happened? Because if the shibboleth were not a shibboleth, this would mean that the economy would tank, right? Here's what you got. The 8 best years in history, growth. 4 best market years in history. A balanced budget. 22 million new jobs. An ascending middle class instead of a sliding middle class, and a shrinking poor population instead of a growing poor population. Plus a $5.4 trillion surplus in the year 2000. Now tell me again why we can't raise taxes on the wealth. Oh, incidentally, I forgot to tell you. Another benefit was more billionaires and millionaires than ever were produced in that period. So I say to you this, you wealthy people, you shouldn't be fighting our taking the tax cut back from you and putting it into the pot for all that we need, including the war in Iraq, I guess. You shouldn't be fighting it. You should welcome it. Because if it strengthens our economy, which it would, to be able to reduce the deficit and have more education and more health care, I would even cut taxes for the middle class with some of that money. Why? Because the middle class is going to spend all that money. The rich people, me and my clients, we're not going to spend it, we invest it. But the middle class, they'll spend it, and that's consumption. And your economy is 70% consumption. And the more they spend, because they need things, they need a new roof, they need a new carriage, they need a new car, they'll spend the money, and that's good for the economy. So in the end, we're not hurting you. We're not confiscating your wealth. We're making it better for you rich people, because when the economy is better, you do better than anybody because you have more of it. You have more interest in it. You have more shares of stock. So where do you get the money? There's plenty of money. And don't let anybody tell you there isn't. Don't let anybody who spends billions and billions and billions of dollars on war the way we do and is reluctant to change it. Don't let any of these people, the problem is these people who are in charge now are comfortable with the nation's discomfort. They're comfortable with the fact that people are screaming at them to end the war, please, for God's sake, and they don't end the war. They're perfectly comfortable ignoring people who say we need more health care, especially for children. And we have a president who says, well, ideologically, I'm against that. I'm against giving the children more money. Why? Well, it's not so much the money, and I love the children, but that is ideologically dangerous because it might get to single payer. What the hell are you talking about, Mr. President? Medicare is single payer. Are you against Medicare? What are you talking about? And so don't listen to these people. They're comfortable with our discomfort. What we need are leaders who are not comfortable with that discomfort. We need leaders who will do the right thing, who will end this war, save lives in the process, save money in the process, $10 billion a month, end this war in Iraq, deal with Iran, and deal with that middle-class malaise intelligently. Now, how do we do that? You and I are going to have to do it. We're going to have to pick the right people in 2008, and for the good of this country and for the good of the world we're living in, where we're such a big part of how the world does, for the good of all of that, I hope we make the right choices. Thank you for listening. Anybody want to stop me by shouting out a question? Because I haven't read these yet. All right, we'll give that one some thought. Here, we'll put that there. Who would you support in the presidential election, and who would you support, and why would you support that person? We'll put that one in here. What are the chances for impeachment? What key pitfalls should the top 3 presidential candidates avoid to enhance their chance for success? Why can't Congress stop funding Iraq by simply filibustering any war spending bill? Well, I told you that what would happen. Incidentally, who's going to stop the president from spending money? Let's say that they didn't vote for the spending of the money. What makes you think he'd stop spending it? We're spending at a deficit level anyway, right? So, that's not going to do it. Nothing's going to do it, unfortunately. Pardon me? Ignore the bill. He'll spend anyway. He'll spend anyway. He's in charge of the machine that makes the dollar bills. That's where we Is the nation of a national health care plan that will actually, given that the GNP of Iraq is only 20 to 30 billion annually, would spending billions in rebuilding Iraq's infrastructure be a good start? Similar approach to Lincoln's attitude toward the South from a former student. We are spending, we have 100 bases in Iraq already, 100 bases, military bases, and a lot of those we're going to leave behind. And we have done, we are doing a lot of reconstruction work now, and part of all the withdrawal plans that I read to you that come out of that book, Out of Iraq and other places, insist on heavy investment in reconstruction, yes, and in infrastructure. The same is true, incidentally, you also have to deal with Israel, which is another thing the Democrats have to be clear on, Israel and Palestine. Bush ran away from Israel for 6 years. I mean, he came up with a plan and said, look, if you can get Arafat to get rid of the terrorists and Arafat can be converted into a same guy, then come back and see me. Well, if we could have done that with Arafat, who needed you? So, but we have to go back and try to do something with Israel and the Palestinians. You have to make a settlement there because that's another, first of all, Israel's in great danger. The Palestinians are in great pain. And that should be enough for it, but also it's a provocation when it comes to terrorism. What is the appropriate solution for the I can't read the word, where were you on 9/11, and what was your first thought about the meaning of the attack for America? Or let me start answering these. 9/11, I was walking down the street, I had gotten to Park Avenue, and I was with another lawyer from my office, and a man ran up to me, and he seemed dazed or drunk, but it was early in the morning, and he said, Gov, he recognized me. He says, Gov, plane hit the building or something. And the guy with me, he says, gee, does that happen to you a lot, Gov? And I said, well, maybe something. No, really. And then we took a few more steps, and a woman came up and said, oh, a second plane. We stopped and chatted a bit. And a woman came up and said, a second plane hit. And then we walked, I guess it was Park Avenue, and we could see everything going on. So where was I? It was on television the next morning, I guess, Diane Sawyer, and said something that I got killed for, really killed. Diane says, well, you had an office in the World Trade Center in 1993 when they tried to blow that up. Didn't you ever? Yes, we had an office up on the 50th floor, et cetera. And said, well, she says, did we learn anything after that? I said, well, I don't know, but I suspect from what I'm hearing, et cetera, that we didn't learn enough about intelligence. We got the guys who did that, but still our intelligence was bad, or this wouldn't have happened, et cetera. And that was a sensible answer. And she said, well, what else do you think we have to do? I said, frankly, we have to catch these people and punish them. There's no question about that. And you need to have a force that deters people like that. And there's no question about that, punishing and deterring, et cetera. But also we have to find out why they're doing it. Who are these people? And what's motivating them? Now, I'm not suggesting that there is any motive that would justify it, but you have to find out what it is that's creating this hate. A hate so great that they would give up their life just to take yours. And you have to get to the source of it. Whoa, I got murdered. I mean, I got phone calls to the office and people stopping you on the street. Jesus, how dare you? And I felt like a naif. What had I said that was so terrible? And my son-in-law, Brian O'Donoghue, called me up and he says, Gov, you've got to give people their moment of anger. And what you're saying is reasonable, but this isn't the time for that. This is the time for, we'll get the bums. We're going to get them, And indeed, that was the reaction we had when the president, and I think correctly, when the president said, we're going to Afghanistan. Where were you on 9/11? I said, do you think Bloomberg will be the independent candidate? If he runs, will he be a good president? This is very interesting, Bloomberg. As a matter of fact, I don't know if I'm allowed to mention Cooper Union. Cooper Union's having a lecture series on the presidency, and it's free and on September 25th, we're going to have, and I'm involved in it. We've had John Edwards. I debated Gingrich there, and we always get 900 people because they wait for tickets in the afternoon. Everything's free, first come, first serve. And we're going to have Bloomberg there, and he's going to be questioned by Tom Brokaw for about an hour. And it should be interesting. Here's how I feel about the independent thing. I gave you the poll that says that a lot of people are thinking independent. There was a veteran from Iraq, two of them, as a matter of fact, on the Diane Williams show last Sunday morning, and they both said the same thing about veterans or people who were fighting in Iraq. Says, how do they feel about the politics? Who are they going to vote for? And both of them said the same thing. It's a pox on both their houses. They say the Republicans, they got us into the mess, and the president's a president. They're all loyal to the president because he's their commander-in-chief. But, the idea of the war, they're not so strong on, no matter what else you hear. And the Democrats, they've let them down. They haven't done anything for them. So they're thinking like independents. There are always independents, but I think there are going to be more independents this time. There are a number of things. You have to think back to 1992. 1992, Clinton won with 42% of the vote. 42%. Bush got 39%, and Perot got 19%. But Perot was up to 39% at one point. Clinton won with 42. Perot had 39. And there was no great feeling as I look back at 92, and I was very much involved in it because people thought I was going to be a candidate, et cetera, and I wasn't. I wound up nominating Bill Clinton at Madison Square Garden, so I remember it well. People weren't thinking the way they are now about a pox on both your houses. You had a sitting president, Bush, who had won the war in Kuwait, and got a lot of points for that. The economy was bad, but he had won the war in Kuwait. And nobody was saying he's stupid, he's no good, etc. I'm not interested in him. And you had the attractive, dashing, smart Bill Clinton. And this guy, Perot, showed up with a little money, and until he started getting daydreams about his family and got a little wispy, and but he was at 39 and then went down to 19. So this is a different moment. This thing will be decided by February at the primary level. It will probably be Hillary Clinton, maybe even Hillary against Rudy. That's right now, that's what it would be. If you stopped and froze the picture now, it would be Hillary against Rudy Giuliani. It's conceivable that Hillary or Edwards or Obama against Giuliani or Romney or McCain, that a lot of people in the country would say, I need something else. I need something more. I want another choice. In addition to these, I want another choice. Now, since it's going to be over so early in February, you have from February to November now to introduce a new candidate, Chuck Hagel. Chuck Hagel and Bloomberg. Bloomberg and Chuck Hagel. Al Gore. So anybody. You have from February until November. That's never happened before. With Bloomberg, he has $500 million, I think he said, that he could spend on a campaign. $500 million? That's a nice campaign. Boy, oh boy, I mean, you could stay home and win with $500 million. So, I mean, that's another thing in his favor. Another thing is, Giuliani was at 40% in the polls just before 9/11. He was at 40% in the polls. Then he did the 4 days in 9/11. He became an icon. Wonderful. And he was great. Mike is at 72%. Giuliani says that one of his attributes is he was a fantastic mayor and solved a lot of our problems. But then how come you're at 40%? And if you were a fantastic mayor and you only got 40%, who was this guy who got 72? He must be Superman. So he's got a lot of things going for him. His own position is he's not running. And I'm sure he's a truth teller. He's not running. But he wants to be a voice in the campaign all the way. I think that's very, very good. As a matter of fact, it's perfect, because if he's not pursuing it for his own individual purposes, then he'll be more credible to the population. Right? He's just there. He's not kibitzing. He's there. He's smart. He's a good mayor. He's not looking for anything except a stronger America. And I think he's going to be a big player no matter what happens. Could he win? Hey, could he win? I couldn't win against Koch. Reagan could never be president. Clinton couldn't possibly win with all the problems he had. The more I think about it, the guys who can't win are the ones who win. Where is the Supreme Court in the next 15 months? Let me tell you about that legal issue, okay? Please, go to your book. Go home. Do it on the computer. Just check me. Do the Constitution. Constitution, all right, that's easy. Just Google Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. Article 1, Section 8. What does it say? Powers of the Congress. The power to declare war, period. That's it. Look at that. This is an illegal war. That's a very important point. Very important. It's too late, apparently, to do anything about it now. It shouldn't be. And the second thing that you should look up, and you don't have to be a lawyer, political question, Supreme Court political question. And what an absurd thing that is, that the Supreme Court, that's there in order to tell us what the Constitution means. Now you have the most important question you could face. Should we go to war? And who will tell us, yay or nay? And the Supreme Court says it's a political question. We don't deal with that. It's not in the Constitution anyway. Just read those things. Suppose there were William and Saddam or weapons of mass destruction, and Saddam did have a relationship with bin Laden. How would this war look like today? Suppose there were weapons of mass destruction and Saddam did have a relationship with bin Laden. How would this war look like today? I don't know. I don't think it would be any different, to be honest with you. We're still there. We're still getting killed. We're still a far way from helping them create a civil society that's really civil. What the whole purpose was to allow them to create a democracy. And we haven't done that. We're not even getting close to doing that. They're further apart now than they ever have been. Why? Well, because Saddam Hussein, I mean, they were potentially at one another's throats for all the years that Saddam Hussein was their dictator leader, and he just forced peace by savaging the Shias and protecting the Sunnis and making the Ba'athist Party out of the Sunnis. So they weren't able to kill one another in that period. And now he's gone, and they're free to be killing themselves, and they are. And we haven't given them any rationale to stop hating one another, because we just haven't done anything. So whether we had been with bin Laden and whether he had known bin Laden and been complicit, we would still be in the same position we are now. Whatever. Point is, regrettably, for the person who asked the question, the truth is there were no weapons of mass destruction, and he didn't have a relationship with bin Laden, and more than that, he didn't have a relationship with al-Qaeda, because we had a relationship with bin Laden. So it's not just remember that. We flew bin Laden's family out of the United States of America right after 9/11. We gave bin Laden money to fight in Afghanistan. We hired bin Laden. We had a relationship with bin Laden. So that's not the key. Is God still, oh, oh, this is a good question, but I have to give you background. I'm debating Gingrich, and Charlie Rose is the moderator. It's the Kerry, yeah, it was the Kerry election, Kerry attempt at election. And Gingrich gets up first and says, Bush is a very religious man. He's a religious man like Lincoln. And, you know, he reads the Bible all the time. And he prays all the time. And just like Abraham Lincoln. He says, now, the governor wrote a book on Lincoln. The governor knows his stuff. He says, I'm sure the governor will agree. So Charlie says, do you agree, Governor? I said, no, I don't agree. I said, he had the Bible. Sure, they all had the Bible. If you look at the bodies strewn on the battlefield, you find Union and the others, and they all had Bibles on both sides. And his second inaugural, he used beautiful language in the Bible and wrote. So he was good at the Bible and stuff, but he was a politician, and it was good for him politically to read from the Bible, because they all did. So he was that, and he probably prayed too, but there's the big difference in the way he prayed. And Rose said, well, what's the difference? He said, well, you know, when Lincoln prayed, he kind of talked to God. When Bush prays, God talks to Bush. I said, no, that's... And so at that point, people laughed. Charlie gave a big guffaw, and other people laughed, and Gingrich got a little bit unhappy about it. He said, well, I didn't think that was fair. And I said, no, wait, excuse me. God forbid, I'm not saying that God doesn't talk to Bush. I mean, who am I to say whether God's talking to anybody? He's not talking to me, I don't think, because I haven't heard him. But if he is, if God, no, I didn't say that. I said if God is talking to Bush, then what language is it? Is it Aramaic? You know, what is it, Hebrew? What is it? Because obviously Bush doesn't understand her. Would you like to be the independent candidate? No. Well, would I like to be the independent candidate? No, I don't think so. I haven't endorsed anybody because I'm busy at Cooper Union trying to get people to answer the specific questions, the big specific questions, and that's what it's all about. But my candidacy, there is a guy in my family, though, who is on his way politically, and you have to keep your eye on him. Why can't Congress, I can't read it. Why can't Congress? Well, we talked about that. What are the chances for impeachment? You know, people have asked me about that before, and the short answer is there isn't enough interest in the Congress for impeachment. You just can't get it going, and that's why Pelosi and the others aren't pushing it. But if you did do it, I think the way to do it would be, and there are a number of ways to start it, the way to do it would be to get an investigator, a private investigator. They do this. They're allowed to appoint somebody to interrogate, to look at one big issue. And the one big issue would be with Bush, not so much is he ignoring the people of the United States, because that's part of our political system. You know, he's there, and you take polls, and the people say they want this, but he was elected, and he's free to follow his own conscience, and he should follow his own conscience. I think he should be instructed by the people and should be humble about making up his decisions in view of the heavy weight of opinion against him. But I couldn't say that because he ignored the popular view. Look, I ignored the popular view on a lot of issues. The most unpopular thing I ever did was the first seatbelt law in history. Nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted it in the state. They cursed me for passing it. And then every state in the Union passed it, and it has saved hundreds of thousands of lives, as we all know. Now, and the other thing was being opposed to the death penalty. I mean, I still get hate mail on that. So you can't blame him for that. What you could impeach him for is lying. So the question would be for this person to investigate, was the president misled or did he lie? You know, and that would be a valid issue. And I think the people would feel a lot better if you could have an inquiry into that and get an answer. And if the answer were he was misled okay, I think, frankly, we'd feel better about him. I've always given him the benefit of the doubt, to be honest, because I'm so inclined, and generally, and I think it's particularly important in dealing with a president in hard times to give him, her, someday, one hopes, not necessarily this time, but you know, someday. Is there a national health care plan that will actually improve the quality of life for Americans? It's very good that we have all these health care plans now. Very, very good. Hillary has come with one now. Edwards has one. Obama has one. The states have health care plans now. It's very, very good. Why? You have to establish first that you need a health care plan, and that's done. You have to make it more popular than it was in 1993. That's happening. I do not believe that any plan that depends upon the insurance companies and the HMOs who are making a ton of money now, you know, the insurance companies, et cetera. Most of these plans depend upon the insurance companies. I would rather have what we have with Medicare. Medicare's overhead is lower. Medicare is a terrifically efficient program compared to all the private programs. But what's happened is we have been able, the people who are opposed to single payer simply means not that the government is going to operate on you, not that the government delivers the stuff, the government pays the bill. That's all it means. And with Medicare, you have your own doctor, you pick your own doctor, she's good, he's good, or she's no good. It's up to you. And the same would be true with a general health care plan. Look at France. France has a terrific plan. And even Great Britain, and you know, they talk about long waits in Canada. Yeah, we know all about the Canadian experience if you're a New Yorker, because they come down to Buffalo, to Roswell Park, to get operated on there. But it's not nearly as bad as it's said to be. And it's much, much cheaper, because you don't have to pay all the big salaries to all those people. You don't have to pay the profit that they get. You don't have to pay for the lobbying that they do, all the money that gets spent by these insurance companies and HMOs who are looking for the business. So the best answer is single payer. You cannot get it now, and I'm a realist about these things. Why? Because they have hurt us by saying it's socialized medicine. And you say socialized medicine, everybody says, ooh. And then you say to them in debates, which I do all the time, but it's Medicare. And then they say, no, it's not. He's full of baloney. It's not Medicare. Medicare is not socialized. Medicare is good. Public schools are socialized education, right? Why? Because the government pays for them. No kidding. The highways, the federal government pays for them. We got socialized highways. And your cars are not blowing up. So is the nation or national, that's health care. Given that the GNP of Iraq is only to, we did that. What's the appropriate solution for the immigration issue? Invite me back. Where I'm way over time. I'm way over time. I love you. I love you. I love you. Let's make sure we get very serious about this election. Let's pick a winner who can do the job. Just keep your eye on the issues. Just keep thinking and just keep showing up. God bless you. Thank you very, very much.